Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 2 of The Lightning. I hope you enjoy it. The outer walls of the palace loomed over them. Andrew led the way through the open gate, drawing salutes from the guards on duty. The best part about traveling with the Crown Prince was that no one dared question them. It came as a relief to leave the city behind. Everywhere he looked revealed places for potential assassins to hide. The riot of movement mingled with every scent imaginable to render his enhanced senses almost useless. Crowded cities were the worst possible place to try and protect someone outside of an actual battlefield. They'd barely entered the courtyard when a trio of page boys in blue tabards came running up to take their horses. Dust puffed up from their shoes as they skidded to a stop and bowed. They held the companions' reins as they dismounted. Frederick smiled when he caught Helena staring in open awe. She hadn't been to the capital before and seemed eager to see everything. Frederick had been here many times over the years. It was unavoidable given his father's position as king's champion. Not that he minded. Everyone had always been nice to him, even the king. While he didn't want to get caught staring, Frederick found he had a difficult time prying his gaze away from Helena. She'd changed into one of the slashed blue uniforms favored by female warlords. Whenever she moved, a smooth expanse of thigh or arm peeked through the gaps. His pulse raced at every glimpse. Andrew wrapped an arm around his neck and laughed. "If you start drooling, I won't be able to take you to see Father." The prince released him and sauntered up to the double doors. Helena fell in behind him, pausing to wink at Frederick, who brought up the rear. It seemed he hadn't been as stealthy in his observations as he'd hoped. At least she didn't seem upset. As they walked down the red carpet toward the throne room, Frederick adjusted his sword and smoothed his navy tunic. King Adam had always treated him kindly as a boy, but now that he'd attained the rank of full warlord, he wanted to present himself as a professional soldier. A pair of heavily armed and armored guards pulled the throne room doors open, and the herald announced, "Crown Prince Andrew." Dozens of courtiers dressed in a rainbow of colors filled the throne room. They stood as one and broke into applause. Andrew smiled and waved to the gathering while Frederick scanned for threats. Helena just looked overwhelmed. He didn't worry she'd be unable to react if danger presented itself. She was every bit the warrior. Andrew led the way down the alley that ran through the center of the room. On a low dais, the king sat on his throne with Frederick's father standing behind him. The king smiled at his son's approach, but father didn't give any reaction. He'd settled into full guard mode and not a single breath escaped his notice. Frederick and Helena stopped at the end of the aisle and took a knee, while Andrew continued on toward the throne. The king rose and clapped his son on the shoulders. "Congratulations, Andrew. I read all the reports and your teachers to a person are satisfied with your effort. It's been too long since a warlord sat on the kingdom's throne." "Thank you, father, though I hope the day I assume the throne is still far away." The king smiled. "As do I, son, as do I. Frederick, come here, my boy." Frederick rose and approached the throne. "Majesty." "Graduated top of your class, I understand. No surprise given your heritage. I doubt Dornkirk will ever admit how proud of you he is, so I suppose it falls to me to say it. Well done." King Adam patted his arm. Frederick bowed, grateful for the king's acknowledgement, while at the same time wishing his father would offer even a hint of recognition of his skill. It wouldn't happen, of course. Father never offered praise, only ways to improve. "And who is this young lady?" the king asked. "Come closer, my dear." Helena's hands trembled as she approached the throne. She didn't say much about her family, but from the little Frederick had been able to glean, her upbringing had been pretty hand-to-mouth. Only the fact that she had warlord potential had raised her out of the slum where she'd grown up. She managed a passable curtsy. "Majesty?" Her voice held steady even if it was quieter than usual. "No need to be nervous, child. I don't bite, and neither does Dornkirk despite his appearance. What's your name?" "Helena. Helena Court. It's an honor to speak to you, your majesty." She made a close study of her boots, drawing a warm chuckle from the king. The king cleared his throat. "Now, son, the time has come for you to make your official tour of the kingdom. It's an old tradition for the future king to travel the land for a year in the guise of a commoner. No one will know who you are, which will allow you to see your people as they really are rather than how they wish you to see them. I'm reassured that you have chosen your traveling companions wisely. Frederick blinked. Andrew had mentioned the tour, but not the duration. A year on the road with Andrew would be interesting, but a year on the road with Helena would be amazing. Now for the most important thing, the king said. To celebrate my son's graduation, we'll be having a ball tonight. I expect everyone to attend. Helena looked Frederick's way. All the blood had drained from her face. She mouthed the words, "I can't dance." Left foot, right foot, that's good. Frederick rested a hand on Helena's hip as he guided her through the steps of a waltz. Her face had twisted in a determined grimace. He failed to restrain a smile. You'll scare the other guests if you can't muster a more relaxed expression than that. She glared at him. As soon as the king dismissed the group, Frederick had offered to teach Helena the basics to help her make it through the night. He'd spent enough time at the palace with his father that he knew the basics of all the court's functions, including some simple dances. The servant girls had delighted in teaching him when he was a boy. Now he had the pleasure of passing on what he'd learned to Helena. He'd led her to a little, out-of-the-way place he remembered from his many years of wandering. It lay halfway between the kitchen and the firewood room. He remembered it because it always smelled like roasting meat. Today was no exception as the entire staff rushed around, preparing for the ball tonight. His mouth watered at all the delightful odors filling the air, the apple tarts especially. He hadn't had one of the cook's special desserts in years. Easy for you to tell me to relax. You've been around these people most of your life. Where I grew up, the rich and powerful wouldn't spit on me if I was on fire. This isn't there, and you're not the same girl. You're a warlord now. If you can master sword forms, you can master a few simple dance steps. I've always preferred the spear. Helena rested her head on Frederick's shoulder and his heart raced. Thanks. He raised an arm, paused, and put it around her. My pleasure. 3 hours later, though still far too soon for Frederick's liking, the lesson ended, and they went their separate ways to wash up and dress before the party. Helena's rapid progress came as no surprise given her natural skills as a warrior. It wasn't that big a leap from sword dancing to regular dancing, after all. Frederick made his way through the empty halls to the room he shared with his father whenever he visited the capital. The lack of servants threw him off for a moment. Ordinarily, you couldn't take a step in the palace without tripping over one of them. Everyone must be busy preparing for tonight. He pushed the door open and started when he found his father sitting in one of the room's 2 chairs. Father waved him over into the other. Frederick took his seat and raised an eyebrow. Is something wrong, Father? Not at all. You kept the prince safe for 5 years and graduated at the top of your class. You've met my expectations in every way. Well done. Frederick stared, struck speechless for a moment. Praise, even faint praise, was a rare gift from his father. That meant he had something unpleasant waiting in the wings. It gives me confidence that you'll continue to do an equally good job during his royal tour. My concern is the 3rd member of your party. Is this woman up to her important task? Frederick bristled at the implied insult to Helena, but relaxed a moment later. Father didn't mean it as an insult. He was simply doing his job as King's champion. No need to worry about Helena. She's one of the strongest warriors I've ever fought, far stronger than Prince Andrew himself. She'll be a fine protector. Father nodded, but the intensity of his gaze didn't waver. And her intentions toward the prince? She isn't looking to seduce him for her own benefit. Now a little annoyance did seep into his voice. Helena and Andrew are friends, nothing more. And you and her? Perhaps a little more than friends, though less than I'd like. Father's stern visage finally cracked. She's stunning. Don't let her get away the way I did your mother. That is the one true regret of my life. Faint praise and a hint of regret. That was far more emotion than he'd seen from Father in his whole life. Father never talked about his mother. Frederick didn't even remember her. She'd left before he turned 1 and never came back. Was he sick? No. A warlord as powerful as Father wouldn't be troubled by any illness. I'll leave so you can get ready. Father left Frederick to contemplate his odd behavior, at least for a few seconds. His thoughts soon turned back to Helena. He couldn't wait to dance with her for real tonight. Evening arrived and Frederick found himself scanning dozens of figures for signs of a threat. He didn't really expect to find any, but the act had been pounded into him for as long as he could remember. Nobles weren't the most reliable people in the world. He doubted any of them would hesitate if one decided the king's death would profit him, though the 4 red-robed sorcerers standing against the wall would give pause to anyone considering doing something stupid. Servants circulated through the room, carrying trays of food and glasses of wine. Andrew's and Frederick's fathers stood on either side of the throne as the king greeted each noble as he or she entered. Father kept an eye on the whole affair, as stern and emotionless as a statue. His hand never strayed far from the demon sword's hilt. The threat was unsubtle and unmistakable. Do anything foolish and you'd find yourself in 2 pieces on the floor. A murmur went through the crowd. It took Frederick a moment to pinpoint the cause, but then he spotted Helena. His breath caught. He'd never seen her in a dress before. The pale blue gown complemented her flawless figure, and simple silver necklace highlighted the smooth skin of her neck. When he recovered his wits, he crossed the throne room and smiled. Wow. I look stupid. You look amazing, like an angel fallen from heaven. Don't be ridiculous. Despite her protests, Helena smiled and a faint blush covered her cheeks. At that moment, the band struck up one of the waltzes they'd been practicing. Frederick grinned and held out his hand. Shall we? After the briefest hesitation, she took his hand. They fell into the flow of the dance, and for Frederick everything disappeared except for her. They could have been the only 2 people in the world. If 100 swords ran him through, he wouldn't have noticed. When the music stopped, she looked past him. Who are all those women surrounding Andrew? He reluctantly released her hand and turned to see what she was talking about. 6 women, each more beautiful than the last, not that any of them held a candle to Helena, surrounded the prince. Andrew looked like a man in need of rescue. But Frederick couldn't fight this battle for him. I believe they're his potential wives. He's required to marry next year, after all. Why? Securing the line of succession or something like that. Frederick shrugged. I'm not too up on the rules nobles have to live by. My job is to protect him from physical threats. Overeager women are his problem, assuming none of them pull a knife. Considering how sharp some of the looks they're giving each other are, it's a wonder there's no blood on the floor already. Andrew must have noticed them watching as he waved and hurried over, earning several angry glares of his own. What's the big idea, Frederick, keeping the most beautiful woman in the castle all to yourself? Helena, you're a vision. Best not say that too loud, Helena grinned. Your many admirers might take it the wrong way. Andrew's face twisted. They're nice girls for the most part, but a little too ambitious for my taste. There's one girl, though. She's sweeter than the rest. I don't dare name her unless the others hear and do something to her. Frederick gave the women a sharp look. You don't think they'd do one another physical harm? No, nothing like that. But there are other tricks they can play. I have it on good authority that there's a substance you can slip into a rival's soap that will make her hair fall out, and there's another mixed with rouge that will cause the victim's face to swell up for days. Charming, Helena said. Where did you hear all this? Before Andrew had a chance to reply, a loud hacking filled the room. All eyes turned to the throne, where King Adam had bent in half and clutched his sides as coughs racked his body. One of the Crimson Legion sorcerers rushed over and passed a glowing hand over his back. The coughing eased at once, and the king straightened. The king wiped sweat from his red face and forced a smile. Don't mind me, everyone. Please enjoy yourselves. I believe I'll call it a night. Father guided the king out of the hall as a pair of legionnaires fell in behind them. That didn't sound good, Helena said. No, Father's been fighting a cough for a while now. The healers assure me it's not life-threatening, just stubborn. I'm going to check on him. See you 2 in the morning. Andrew took off after his father, leaving Frederick and Hella staring at his back. Despite the king's best wishes, the ball broke up early and everyone left for their beds. No one had the heart to celebrate with their ruler suffering from an illness. Frederick regretted the loss of time with Helena, but there was no help for it. Hopefully they'd have more chances during their journey. The morning found Frederick and the others up and on their way shortly after dawn. They packed light and dressed in simple peasant garb. Even their horses weren't from the royal stables. The idea of the tour was for the Crown Prince to see how the people lived and to interact with them on a personal level rather than as a monarch. The tradition had served the kingdom well for centuries. Frederick adjusted his sword and glanced to the left. Andrew yawned and scratched at the day's growth of beard he'd neglected to shave that morning. If the rough homespun tunic he wore troubled the prince, he gave no indication. Andrew was probably using iron skin, the same as Frederick. On the road, you needed to maintain basic defensive techniques at all times. You never knew when an arrow might come flying out of the maple trees that lined the stretch of road. He doubted they'd run into trouble a mile from the capital, but he didn't want to develop bad habits. Beyond Andrew, Helena carried her spear couched under her arm like a lance. She hadn't bothered with a dress, instead favoring a man's garb for its ease of movement. The tunic and trousers did nothing to disguise the feminine figure underneath. No one would be mistaking Helena for a man regardless of her outfit. She must have sensed him looking at her because she turned and smiled. Frederick shifted his gaze back to the prince. "How was your father this morning?" "Better. Archmage Samhail performed a healing on him last night. He seemed to think he burned away all the infection, but he's thought that the last 3 times. "Some things just need time," Helena said. "As warlords, I think we sometimes forget that." Andrew nodded. "I understand, it's just I hate to see him so weak. Hopefully he'll take it easy and let the ministers handle court business for a while." Frederick barked a laugh. "The only person more stubborn in court than my father is yours. I got 2 crowns that says you'll be back on the throne before 2 days is out." Helena looked his way. "You're on. I say you rest for at least a week." They both looked at Andrew, who shook his head. "I suspect he'll be up and out of bed before the day is out." They rode in amiable silence for the rest of the afternoon, savoring the beautiful fall day. Winter would come soon enough, though if they planned their route right, they should be well to the south before the cold arrived in earnest. Thanks for listening to episode 2 of The Lightning. I hope you'll join me next week for episode 3. You can check out the complete Soul Force saga on my website. Links in the description. Until next time, goodbye.